My name is Rebecca, and I'm 48 years old, living in Denver, Colorado. 3 years ago, my world crumbled when my husband Michael was taken from me by a sudden stroke. There had been no warning signs, no opportunity for final words, just the crushing silence that follows when the person who gave your life meaning simply vanishes. Our home, once filled with warmth and conversation, became a mausoleum of memories, and I found myself suffocating in grief so profound I couldn't imagine ever breathing freely again. I had lost my mother 6 years earlier and believed I understood what mourning meant. But losing Michael was entirely different. He wasn't merely my spouse. He was my closest confidant, my spiritual partner, the man who had walked beside me through every challenge. The day Michael left this world, everything inside me fractured. One moment he was beside me, laughing over coffee in our Denver kitchen, and the next, a sudden stroke snatched him into silence. No warning, no chance to whisper a final prayer together, no moment to say, "I'll see you soon." Only the hollow echo of absence filling every room. You know that kind of silence, it doesn't just sit in the air, it presses against your ribs until you can barely breathe. I had walked through grief before. My mother passed 6 years earlier, and I thought I understood mourning. But this was different. Losing Michael wasn't losing a parent whose life had been well lived. It was losing the man who carried my faith with me, who prayed with me morning and night, who touched my hand when doubt crept in. When he vanished, my house became a museum of traces. The cologne still lingering in the closet, the well-worn Bible with his notes, the indentation on his pillow that refused to rise. I moved through those early days, as though underwater. Friends brought casseroles, neighbors offered condolences, church members quoted scripture about divine plans, but their words collided with the fog around me. I smiled, nodded, whispered thanks, then closed the door and let the silence swallow me. Even prayer felt foreign. I would kneel and try to speak, but my words dissolved before they reached heaven. The ceiling seemed made of stone. The God I had once trusted so fully now felt distant, even cruel. My faith, once alive, turned into brittle pages I couldn't bring myself to open. Mornings stretched long. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the whir of the fan, wondering why I was still breathing when the one who gave meaning to my breath was gone. Coffee tasted bitter. The sun rising over the Rockies no longer inspired awe, it mocked me with its relentless rhythm. As if to say, life moves on without him. I pulled away from church. Sitting in the pew, hearing hymns about joy and peace, only sharpened the blade of loss. I felt like an imposter among believers who smiled and lifted their hands while I crumbled inside. Grief is not just sorrow, it is physical. My body felt heavier, my steps slower, my chest constricted as if invisible cords bound me. Nights were worse. I would wake at 3 a.m. to an empty bed, the clock's red digits glowing like silent judges. In those hours, my tears seemed endless, rolling down my cheeks until the sheets were damp. I whispered Michael's name into the darkness, as though the syllables themselves could conjure him back. One small thing I held on to was memory. I would replay his laughter, the way he whistled when fixing the leaky faucet, the way he kissed my forehead before sleep. But even those memories became sharp edges, cutting deeper into the wound. And in the quietest corners of my heart, I accused God. Why take him? Why so suddenly? Why leave me in this mausoleum of memories? You may know that sensation, that endless questioning that circles like a vulture, offering no answers. That is where I lived. It wasn't life, not really. It was survival. Each day blurred into the next, and I existed only because my lungs refused to stop. I thought grief had an endpoint, like a tunnel you eventually emerge from. But this was no tunnel, it was a cavern, and I was trapped deep inside, with no light to guide me out. In that darkness, I started to harden. I stopped opening my Bible. I stopped whispering prayers before meals. I even stopped acknowledging the seasons outside, whether snow fell or spring flowers bloomed. It no longer mattered. My world shrank to four walls and a hollow heart. Faith, once the anchor of my soul, now felt like sand slipping through my fingers. And yet, even there, something unseen was watching. I didn't realize then that loss can be the soil where new roots grow, even if you resist them at first. But at that stage, all I knew was pain, raw, numbing pain that made me want to disappear. That is how it began, the loss that broke me, the silence that suffocated me, the faith that felt abandoned. This was the valley I walked before I ever glimpsed the light. Weeks blurred into months, and survival became my only rhythm. You know the kind of survival I mean, mechanical, empty, where you go through motions without tasting, without feeling. I rose from bed because my body demanded it, not because my spirit wanted it. I brushed my teeth, boiled water, checked the mail, and drifted through the day as if I were a shadow of myself. Even the clock on the wall seemed louder, reminding me that time was moving forward, dragging me with it, whether I wished to follow or not. Church, once a sanctuary, transformed into a place of dissonance. The choir sang of joy, but the notes scraped across my raw nerves. Sermons spoke of God's goodness, but I sat frozen, arms crossed, thinking, if God is good, why this? Why him? Why now? I began to sit in the back pew, near the door, ready to slip out before someone noticed the absence of my smile. Soon, I stopped going at all. My seat became vacant, gathering dust like the unused hymnal on my shelf. Prayer died quietly, without ceremony. At first, I whispered fractured sentences into the night, pleas for strength, cries for answers. But the silence that met me was unbearable. So I stopped. My Bible, once worn from shared mornings with Michael, now rested untouched on the nightstand. Dust gathered on the cover, and its pages no longer rustled under my fingers. Faith, which had once been the air I breathed, felt foreign, as if it belonged to another life, another woman. The house itself mirrored my emptiness. Dishes stacked in the sink. Curtains remained drawn, shutting out both sun and stars. The air grew heavy, stagnant, carrying the scent of neglect. Even the floor creaked differently without Michael's footsteps pacing across it. At night, the silence pressed on me until I longed for noise, any noise to break it. Sometimes I would leave the television on, not to watch, but to drown the ache with meaningless chatter. Grief has a way of isolating you, not only from others but from yourself. Friends called less often. Their voices were kind but cautious, as if they feared saying the wrong thing. Invitations dwindled. And when they came, I declined with rehearsed excuses. I'm tired. I'm busy. Maybe another time. The truth was simpler. I couldn't bear their laughter, their stories, their intact families. My world had collapsed, and I could not enter theirs without feeling like an intruder. I began to notice how the body absorbed sorrow. My shoulders hunched. My appetite disappeared. Sleep came in shallow bursts, haunted by dreams where Michael's voice reached for me, only to vanish when I awoke. Even my hands, once busy with work and homemaking, now trembled when holding a coffee mug. I felt like a ghost, wandering my own home. The city outside Denver pulsed with life. Cars honked, children played in yards, the Rockies stood in their eternal majesty. But I was cut off, as though an invisible pane of glass separated me from all that was alive. I moved within my sealed chamber, breathing recycled air of despair. If anyone asked how I was, I answered automatically, I'm fine. 2 words that became my armor, though, inside, I was breaking. Faith, I believed, had abandoned me. Or maybe I had abandoned it. I wasn't sure. I only knew that God no longer felt near. His promises sounded hollow. His presence, absent. I carried resentment like a stone in my chest. I avoided mirrors because the woman reflected there was not the Rebecca I once knew. Still, deep inside, in some hidden chamber of my soul, a whisper lingered. Hold on. I tried to smother it. I told myself it was false hope, the remnants of old belief. But the whisper refused to die. It was faint, fragile, almost drowned by sorrow, but it was there. And though I could not recognize it then, that whisper was the first sign that the cavern of grief was not endless. But in that season, I did not want whispers. I wanted Michael. I wanted the man who held my hand during storms and prayed with me when faith faltered. Instead, I had silence, darkness, and questions that multiplied. Each night I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking why the Almighty had permitted this. And each night, no answer came. Only the hum of the refrigerator in the next room, only the slow tick of the clock reminding me that another day would come, whether I wanted it or not. This was the slow gray of survival. Faith abandoned, church deserted, life reduced to a series of hollow tasks. And it was in this hollowing that something unexpected was preparing to break through. It was late August when the first crack in my armor appeared. The day was sweltering, the kind of Colorado heat that presses against your skin and makes every step heavy. I had walked to the grocery store and back, carrying only a few items, just enough to survive another day. As I trudged past a demolition site, I heard it. A faint, pitiful whimper rising from behind a pile of discarded lumber and rusted pipes. At first I ignored it. My body wanted to keep moving, to get back to the safety of my walls where sorrow could swallow me in peace. But that sound, thin, desperate, cut through the numbness that had ruled me for months. Something inside me tightened. Against my will, I slowed, listening again. The cry came once more, barely audible but insistent. I stepped closer, the grit of gravel crunching beneath my shoes, the air thick with dust and the metallic tang of rust. And there, huddled in the shadows of debris, lay a border collie puppy, so thin his ribs jutted out like fragile scaffolding. His coat was matted, his eyes clouded with thirst. He was too weak to stand, his small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The sight pierced me. I had never been drawn to animals. Michael had always wanted a dog, but I resisted, telling him it was too much responsibility, too much work. Yet here I was, staring into the eyes of a creature clinging to life, abandoned to die in the heat. His gaze met mine, and in it I saw something unsettling, a reflection of my own pain. His abandonment mirrored my own, his hunger, my emptiness, his weakness, my despair. I knelt in the dirt, my knees pressing against sharp stones, and gently lifted him into my arms. His body was light, fragile, almost insubstantial, as though he could dissolve into dust at any moment. His fur smelled of neglect, but beneath the odor, there was warmth, faint but present. Without fully understanding why, I carried him home. I named him Joshua, after the biblical leader who remained steadfast when others faltered. At first, caring for him felt like another burden, added to the crushing weight I already carried. He was ill, requiring constant attention and expensive treatments I could hardly afford. My savings drained, my patience stretched thin. The house, once silent, now echoed with his whimpers, and the scraping of his claws on the hardwood floors Michael had laid by hand. I resented it. I resented him. I resented the intrusion on my carefully maintained misery, yet something kept me from letting go. Each time he looked at me with those amber eyes, weak but searching, I felt seen. It was as if he recognized my suffering, as if he carried his own cross alongside mine. Nights became different. Instead of endless silence, there were small sounds of life. Joshua's breathing, his soft paws shifting against the floor, his whines for comfort. I found myself speaking to him, words that had been locked away since Michael's death. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered. "I don't know if I believe anymore." And somehow, his presence didn't demand answers. He only listened. Caring for Joshua forced me into routine. I had to rise each morning, feed him, walk him, tend to his needs. At first it felt mechanical, another checklist of survival. But gradually, it became something more. When he rested his head on my lap, when his small body curled against mine during sleepless nights, I felt a flicker of companionship. It wasn't Michael, no, it could never be. But it was life, insisting itself upon me, asking me to choose participation instead of apathy. You see, grief isolates. It convinces you that you're the only one abandoned, the only one aching. But that puppy, frail and trembling, broke through my isolation. In his suffering, I recognized my own, and in saving him, I unknowingly began to save myself. Joshua grew stronger. His ribs no longer protruded so starkly, his eyes brightened, his tail wagged with cautious joy. And as he healed, I noticed something happening in me. The shell around my heart began to crack. I started to hear myself whispering prayers again, not the polished prayers of church, but raw, stumbling words poured out in the middle of the night. I told God of my pain, my anger, my emptiness. I didn't receive thunder from heaven in response, but I sensed a shift, a small, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, I was not completely forgotten. That's the strange thing about rescue. Sometimes the one you save becomes the one who saves you. Joshua had been abandoned in the dust, but God used him to reach into the dust of my own despair. I thought I was lifting him from death, but in truth, he was lifting me. Joshua's presence, fragile at first, became the rhythm that stitched my broken days together. At sunrise, when the sky over Denver was brushed with pink and gold, I would hear the scratch of his paws across the hardwood and the soft whine that meant, "I'm hungry." I rose not because I wanted to, but because he needed me. That need tethered me to life when nothing else could. Feeding him, cleaning the messes, taking him outside in the morning, chill, these were small tasks, ordinary things. Yet each one carried a hidden power. They forced me to move, to engage, to step out of the cavern of grief. The silence that had been unbearable was now filled with the rhythm of his breathing, the occasional bark, the clatter of his food dish. Even the house began to feel less like a mausoleum and more like a place where life, unexpected, inconvenient life, was happening again. But make no mistake, it wasn't easy. His illnesses demanded constant care. Trips to the vet drained my wallet. Sleepless nights tested my patience. At times, resentment welled up. Why did I pick him up that day? Why add more weight to the sorrow I already carry? I told myself he was just a dog, that my grief for Michael was too great for anything else to matter. Yet when I looked into Joshua's amber eyes, something in me softened. It was as if those eyes saw past my defenses, into the core of my loneliness, and chose not to look away. There were nights I sat in the dark, my Bible still untouched, my prayers still absent. Joshua would curl beside me, pressing his warm body against my leg. I would whisper confessions not to God but to him. I'm tired. I don't know what I believe anymore. I don't even know who I am. His only response was a steady presence, a weight of comfort that words could not provide. Somehow, that was enough. Gradually, I began to speak to God again, not with rehearsed devotion, but with raw honesty. My words stumbled, halting, stripped of all polish. Why, Lord? Why did you take him? Why do you leave me here? And though the silence still lingered, I noticed a change. My questions no longer bounced off the ceiling like before. They landed somewhere, as if carried by unseen hands. The tidbit that marked this season was simple. Companionship heals in ways theology cannot explain. Joshua's companionship cracked the walls I had built, creating space for God's voice to whisper again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with fire, Joshua climbed onto the couch beside me. His head rested on my lap, his eyes heavy with trust. In that quiet moment, I realized something profound. This small creature, once abandoned, had become the vessel through which God reached into my abandonment. His existence was proof that I had not been forsaken. The main emotion of this season was cautious hope. It was not the triumphant faith of old, but the fragile stirring of possibility, that perhaps life could hold meaning again, that perhaps God had not forgotten me, that perhaps love was not entirely lost. When I looked at Joshua bounding clumsily across the yard, his tail wagging in uneven arcs, I felt the first flicker of joy I had known in months. It was faint, but real. And that faint joy carried me into the next chapter, where the ordinary would suddenly give way to the extraordinary. It was the 28th of August, 2025, a Friday morning that began like any other. The Colorado sun had risen gently, not yet heavy with heat. A soft breeze whispered through the elm trees that lined our neighborhood, and the air felt almost tender, as though creation itself had paused to breathe with me. Joshua, now strong and spirited, wagged his tail with anticipation as I clipped the leash onto his collar. Our walks had become ritual, the thread stitching each day together, giving me purpose. We followed our routine, down Elm Street, around the park, past familiar houses, with porches draped in late summer flowers. The sidewalks were sprinkled with dew, and children's laughter floated from yards where sprinklers spun arcs of water across the grass. Joshua trotted beside me, his steps sure, his eyes bright, his body filled with life. I smiled faintly as I watched him how far he had come from the heap of bones I'd lifted from behind that demolition site. He was alive, and in some quiet way, so was I. We reached the intersection at 3rd and Elm, a crosswalk I had walked hundreds of times before. The signal glowed red. Cars were lined up, engines idling, drivers waiting. I looked both ways, cautious as always, then stepped into the crosswalk with Joshua, padding faithfully beside me. Halfway across, I heard the sudden roar of an engine breaking the stillness. My heart seized as I turned. A pickup truck swerved around the stopped vehicles, its tires screeching, its frame hurtling forward like a beast unleashed. The driver was young, reckless, his hands gripping the wheel as if the street were his racetrack. Time slowed. I yanked Joshua's leash with all the force I had, desperate to pull him back. But it was too late. The bumper struck him, sending his body airborne in a terrible arc. The leash tore from my grip as I stumbled. my own body thrown across the asphalt. The world spun concrete, sky, trees. Then came the crack of my head colliding with the curb. Darkness. But not emptiness. I became aware of warmth, an enveloping light that pulsed with peace. The weight of my body, the searing pain in my skull, the heaviness of grief, all of it dissolved. I floated, untethered, suspended in a presence more real than anything I had known. The air itself shimmered, alive, humming with a frequency that spoke without words.
There, in that radiant presence, I finally understood. Grief had not abandoned me to emptiness. It had led me here, to the very feet of Christ. The light around us swelled, until it was no longer background, it was the very fabric of existence. Jesus gestured, and suddenly, the space shifted. The brilliance unfolded into a landscape that stole my breath. Rolling hills stretched beyond sight, each blade of grass glowing with its own soft radiance. Streams of crystal water wound through valleys. Their music, unlike any river I had known, every drop shimmering with life. Flowers bloomed in colors that seemed woven from joy itself. Hues so pure they awakened something long dormant in me. The air pulsed with peace. It wasn't just the absence of conflict. It was the tangible presence of harmony, as if all of creation was singing in one heartbeat. My spirit felt weightless, every scar of grief smoothed, every jagged edge softened. For the first time in years, I was not merely surviving, I was alive fully, abundantly, endlessly alive. Then I saw them, animals, everywhere, lions lying down beside lambs, their eyes gentle, free of hunger, wolves and deer grazing side by side, unafraid, eagles soaring above, with doves resting beneath their wings. It was Isaiah's vision, alive before me, not as metaphor, but as reality. My mind could hardly hold it, yet my spirit cried out in recognition. This is the redeemed creation. This is Eden restored. And then Joshua. Across one of the hills, I saw him bounding with joy, his body strong, his coat gleaming like silver in the eternal light. He ran with the carefree grace of a creature completely healed, completely whole. My heart leapt. Even before he turned his head, even before his tail wagged in recognition, I knew it was him, my Joshua, no longer frail, no longer trembling, no longer broken, alive in a way that made Earth's definition of life seem like a shadow. Tears streamed down my soul. If such a thing is possible, how, Lord? The thought rose unbidden. I was told animals do not have souls. I was told they vanish at death. Jesus' gaze met mine, patient, knowing, and his words, though beyond language, carved into me with clarity. Animals do not bear the image of God as you do, but they carry my breath of life. That spark is not lost. Creation itself groans for redemption. In that moment, Romans 8 unfolded in me like a scroll. Creation, waiting, longing, aching for the day of release. Joshua was not an exception. He was evidence. Evidence that all of creation is caught up in God's plan of renewal. My grief for him, the love I carried, had not been wasted. Love, never island. The main emotion here was wonder pure, trembling wonder at the vastness of redemption, at the breadth of God's mercy that stretches not only to mankind, but to the whole of creation. The tidbit etched into my heart was this: heaven is not a disembodied realm of floating souls. It is a renewed earth, physical, vibrant, brimming with the creatures God spoke into being at the dawn of time. Not lost, not discarded, redeemed. As Joshua bounded closer, as his eyes met mine with joy that words cannot describe, I felt it deep in my spirit. Love does not end at death. Love carries forward, sanctified, perfected, eternal. As Joshua's joyous form dissolved into the horizon of that radiant field, another figure appeared. walking across the hills, with a stride that was both familiar and transformed. My breath caught, though breath was no longer what sustained me. It was Michael, not the Michael I had watched collapse from a sudden stroke, not the weary husband worn by the burdens of life, but Michael restored whole, radiant, youthful, yet more real than any version I had ever known. His face shone with vitality, the lines of worry gone, his eyes sparkling with the same warmth that had once steadied me through countless storms. I ran to him not with legs of flesh, but with the pull of love that transcends all barriers. When we embraced, it was not a dreamlike blur, but solid, true, more substantial than any earthly touch. I felt the strength of his arms, the familiar rhythm of his presence, only now infused with glory. In that embrace, years of grief dissolved like mist in the morning Sunday. Rebecca. His voice resonated like music, filling me with a joy I thought I'd never know again. My soul wept with relief. Yet I knew this reunion was not the end of the story. It was a glimpse, a foretaste of what awaited. Jesus stood near us, his expression both tender and solemn. He allowed this reunion, but his gaze reminded me, this is not yet your time. Still, he let me drink from this well of joy, to know beyond doubt that Michael lived, that he was whole, that death had not been the end. Then Jesus' voice carried across the landscape, not only to me, but as though it rippled through creation itself. The signs are being fulfilled. The love of many has grown cold. Nations rise against nations. Pestilence spreads. Earth groans with famine and quake. The time of my return draws near. My spirit trembled. I had sensed the urgency even on earth, in the chaos of the world, but hearing it from his lips shook me. Still, his words carried not only warning but mercy. I may delay a short time, to give more hearts space to turn, but the door of mercy will not remain open forever. The main emotion of this moment was tenderness, a tenderness that came in waves, the tenderness of reunion with Michael, the tenderness of Jesus' compassion, the tenderness of being entrusted with truth, too weighty to ignore. The tidbit that seared itself into my heart was this: mercy has a limit in time. God's patience is vast, but not endless. There will come a moment when the bridegroom arrives, and the door will be shut. Michael smiled at me, his hand resting gently against mine. I've seen how God sent Joshua to you, he said, his voice vibrant, steady. Every moment of love you shared with him prepared you for this. And I knew his words were true, because I felt the confirmation of Jesus' presence, sealing them in my heart. But even in that joy, I understood the gravity. I could not stay, not yet. Jesus was preparing me for something greater, a mission, a warning, a call to speak what I had seen. Tenderness flooded me again, but now it was mixed with urgency. The glimpse of glory was not given to satisfy my longing alone. It was entrusted so that I might return and tell others, "He is coming. Be ready." As Jesus' words settled into me, the vision shifted once more. The brilliance dimmed into scenes that pierced my heart with a different kind of ache. I saw homes on earth silent, empty pets wandering the halls, waiting for owners who would never return. Dogs whined at closed doors, cats paced windowsills, horses pawed at gates, confused and untended. These were the animals of believers, left behind in the moment when Christ's bride was taken to meet him in the air. The sorrow of it gripped me. Their loyalty, their dependence, their innocent confusion. It was unbearable to watch, yet Jesus' presence steadied me, even as he spoke. Creation itself will groan in the tribulation that follows. These creatures will suffer, as all the world will suffer, but do not despair. The love my children poured into them is not lost. What has been entrusted to me will not be forgotten. Then he showed me more. Some animals were taken in by neighbors, family members, those who had not been ready for his coming. Others wandered streets, their cries joining the chaos of a world plunged into judgment. And yet, even in the darkness of those visions, a thread of hope wove through. When Christ returns to establish his kingdom, the restoration will not exclude them. The animals beloved by his children will be part of the renewal, resurrected, perfected, redeemed. My heart broke at the sight of their suffering, but I also felt a deep compassion from him, a compassion that assured me nothing escapes his care, not even the smallest sparrow. The grief I carried for Joshua, the love Michael had for a golden retriever he never owned, the countless tears shed by believers for their lost companions, all of it mattered. All of it would be answered in the great renewal. The main emotion of this vision was compassion, Christ's compassion, burning brighter than the sorrow itself. His heart for creation pulsed through every image, every word. The tidbit engraved into me was this: our treatment of animals, our care or neglect of creation, is not trivial. It reflects the state of our hearts, and God himself will address it in judgment and in restoration. I watched as the vision unfolded into glimpses of the future kingdom. Children laughing with resurrected pets, lions stretched peacefully in fields, birds singing in forests unmarred by destruction. Creation liberated, finally free. It was beauty beyond telling, and yet it carried a warning. The way there would pass through tribulation, and those unprepared would face loss they could not imagine. I understood then why Jesus was showing me all this. It was not only comfort for my heart, but a charge for my lips, to remind his people, he is coming soon. To tell them, do not cling to sin, do not grow lukewarm, do not assume there is more time. The door of mercy is closing, and love itself is the preparation. I turned to Joshua, whole and radiant beside me, and I thought of that whimper I had heard behind the rubble years before. His cry had drawn me out of numbness then. Now Christ was sending me with a greater cry, the cry of warning, of compassion, of urgent love for the sake of a world asleep at the edge of eternity. The vision of restoration faded into the brilliance of his presence once more, and I felt the weight of his gaze upon me. It was not the heaviness of condemnation, but the holy gravity of a mission. I knew without him saying it. I could not remain. My time was not finished. There was work to be done on earth. Jesus stepped closer, his hand reaching toward me not to bind, not to force, but to commission. Waves of love radiated, yet carried within them an urgency that made my spirit tremble. You must return, Rebecca. The words impressed themselves into me. Undeniable. What you have seen is not yours alone. Comfort the grieving. Warn the complacent. Tell the world I am near. I thought of Michael's embrace, of Joshua bounding whole across eternal fields, of the peaceable kingdom spread before me. My heart ached to stay, to remain in that perfect harmony. But his eyes held me, reminding me of a truth deeper than longing. Obedience is love, and my love for him, for Michael, for Joshua, for all who needed to hear, meant I could not cling to eternity yet. Lord, my spirit whispered, I am afraid. And in answer, his hand rested on mine. Peace surged through me, not the fragile kind that shatters at sorrow, but the steel-strong peace of heaven itself. You are not alone. My spirit goes with you. That assurance, that presence, wrapped itself around me like a cloak. Then he showed me a final glimpse. Crowds upon crowds of people, faces blurred, yet hearts distinct, each carrying grief, questions, doubts, fears. Some clutched framed photos of spouses, others toys of children gone too soon. Still others held empty collars of pets they had loved and lost. A tide of humanity drowning in loss, yet waiting, longing for hope. And he said, tell them what you saw. Tell them love is not lost. Tell them I am coming soon, and the time to prepare is now. The main emotion that filled me then was urgency, an urgency that burned like fire in my chest, an urgency that would not let me remain silent. The tidbit that sealed the moment was this: testimonies are not stories to hoard, they are seeds to scatter. The vision entrusted to me was not mine to guard, but mine to sow, even if only one heart awakened from slumber. The landscape of glory began to blur, the hills and streams fading, the radiant figures of Michael and Joshua receding into distance. My spirit strained toward them, aching to stay. But Jesus' voice, both gentle and commanding, drew me back. "Go, Rebecca. Speak. Time is short." Then darkness again, but not the same. My body lay broken on the asphalt, yet breath rushed back into me, pain throbbing in my skull, sounds of chaos rising all around. The accident scene was real again, sirens in the distance, voices shouting, Joshua's body still. Tears choked me, but his words steadied me. This is not the end. Love endures. Speak. And do not remain silent. I had crossed the veil, and now I returned. Marked, changed, sent. Slow down, soften now. The story does not end in thunder but in whisper. If you are still here, your heart has walked with mine through sorrow, rescue, vision, and commission. Perhaps you, too, have known the ache of loss, the silence of unanswered prayers, the weight of grief that refuses to let go. Hear me. Jesus has not abandoned you. He sees every tear. He holds every broken piece, and he weaves even the cries of creatures into his story of redemption. Michael lives, Joshua lives, and so does the love you have carried for those you thought gone forever. Nothing entrusted to God is lost. Nothing surrendered in love will perish. He is coming soon, not to erase but to renew, not to destroy but to restore. The new earth awaits, radiant and whole, filled with joy beyond imagining. So prepare your heart. Do not wait, do not delay. Let go of bitterness. Return to prayer. Cling to him as the only anchor that will hold when the storms rise. His mercy is wide but not endless, the door will close. And now is the hour to be ready. Let these words settle softly over you tonight. Let them steady your breathing, calm your spirit, and remind you, you are not alone. The same Jesus who called me by name calls you, too. He whispers into your silence. He enters your grief, and he promises you life that will never end. If these words resonate with you, leave an amen in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and share it with at least 3 friends or family members right now. Now is your time to make a difference. Spreading this message is not only an act of love, but also a mission that Jesus himself has entrusted to you.
The first sensation was relief. Relief that the ache in my chest, the loneliness that had smothered me for 3 years, the sudden horror of Joshua's accident, all of it had lifted. The second sensation was recognition. Though I could not yet see clearly, I knew I was not alone. Someone was drawing near. My senses were sharper here. Colors vibrated with intensity. Sounds carried resonance deeper than ears could capture. I felt simultaneously weightless and anchored, free yet more alive than I had ever been. I realized with a start, this is death. This is what it feels like to cross the veil. And yet, it wasn't frightening. It was as if the veil itself had opened not into emptiness, but into embrace. A tunnel of light stretched ahead, not cold or clinical, but warm, pulsing with love. It beckoned me forward, inviting, irresistible. I thought of Joshua, his body struck, his small form broken on the asphalt. I thought of Michael, whose sudden absence had hollowed my life. And for the first time, the possibility stirred. Perhaps I was about to see them again. The main emotion of this moment was shock, turning into peace. One heartbeat, I was on asphalt, pain splitting my body. The next heartbeat, I was in a luminous current of love, free from the weight of mortality. The tidbit that etched itself into my awareness was this: death is not an end, but a threshold. A door that opens not into nothingness, but into a reality more alive than the one we leave behind. And as the presence drew closer, taking form in the brilliance of light, I knew without doubt who it was. Out of the radiance, the figure emerged, not in blinding suddenness, but like dawn spreading across the horizon, gentle yet unstoppable. The light shaped itself into a presence so overwhelming that my spirit trembled and yet rested all at once. His face shone with compassion, his eyes like oceans that held both the sorrow of mankind and the mercy that never ends. I did not need to ask his name. I knew. My soul recognized him before my mind could form the thought. Rebecca. The way he spoke my name was unlike any sound on earth. It wasn't a syllable passing through air. It was love itself wrapping around me, filling the hollows left by grief. I wept not with tears of flesh, but with the flooding release of a heart suddenly seen, suddenly understood, suddenly held. I tried to speak, but words caught. My thoughts tumbled instead. Joshua, is he alive? Did he survive? Lord, I tried. I failed. I failed him, just as I failed Michael. The anguish swelled inside me like a storm, but his gaze calmed it before it consumed me. You did not fail, his presence seemed to say, not in phrases of human language but in waves of knowing that settled into my very being. Joshua was sent to you, Rebecca. He was not an accident. His abandonment reflected your abandonment. His cry mirrored your cry. You lifted him because in saving him, I was saving you. I understood then what I could not have seen in the dust and rubble of that August afternoon years earlier. I thought I had found a dying puppy by chance. But Jesus showed me that Joshua had been placed in my path as a divine appointment. That broken animal was not simply rescued. He was sent as a mirror of my grief, a vessel to carry me back toward life. Every moment we had shared, every sleepless night, every frustrated sigh, every tentative smile, it all pulsed with a greater meaning. God had used Joshua to tether me to hope when I was ready to collapse into despair. The leash I held on to him was the very leash that kept me from falling into the abyss of unbelief. My heart swelled with awe. The emotion was not the shock of seeing him, though that alone left me undone, but the awe of realizing how intricately he had woven my pain into purpose. Nothing had been wasted. Not my sorrow, not my loneliness, not even my reluctant care for a fragile puppy. The tidbit that burned itself into me in this moment was this. What we call coincidence is often God's mercy in disguise. The cries we choose not to ignore can be the very lifelines heaven extends to us. Jesus' presence was not merely luminous, it was magnetic. He stepped closer, and I felt his compassion like waves of warmth dissolving the shame and bitterness that had clung to me. He knew my doubts, my nights of silence, my accusations, and still, he looked at me as if I were his treasure. The grief that had defined me for 3 years suddenly felt small compared to the immensity of his love. I thought of Michael then, and before I could even form the question, Jesus' gaze deepened. I sensed his assurance. You will see him again. Nothing is lost in me. The main emotion was awe, pure, unfiltered awe at standing before the one whose voice holds galaxies and whose tenderness bends down to the cries of a widow and her dog. Awe at the realization that even in my darkest valley, I had not walked alone.